I left home at 4:11 a.m. on a Tuesday, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and 22 years of resentment that had been building since I was old enough to understand that love in my family came with strings attached. The house on Maple Street had always looked perfect from the outside, with its white picket fence, manicured lawn, and the flower boxes my mother tended with a devotion she never quite extended to me. It was the kind of house people paused to admire during evening walks, imagining the warm glow of a happy family inside. But behind those lace curtains and neatly trimmed hedges was a truth that would have embarrassed even the most dysfunctional soap opera. A house where every smile was practiced, every compliment carefully rationed, and every kind gesture a transaction waiting to be repaid. I'd spent the last few weeks living in a daze, moving between my part-time jobs at the bookstore and the coffee shop, studying for my online degree, and pretending that the tension at home hadn't grown into a monster so large it was suffocating me. My father, Robert Parker, liked to remind me that family comes first, but what he really meant was, do as I say, pay your share, and don't ask questions. My mother, Laura Parker, was the kind of woman who could smile while serving you dinner and gut you with a single comment hidden inside a compliment. And then there was Ryan, my older brother, the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he wrecked my father's car, skipped class, or broke the neighbor's mailbox with a baseball bat. When Ryan graduated from college the week before, the whole family turned into a celebration committee. They ordered a cake with his name in gold icing, invited every neighbor we'd ever known, and bought him a brand new Camry, pearl white, leather interior, Bluetooth stereo, the works. The night they gave it to him, I sat across the table, cutting my pot roast into small, neat bites and trying to ignore the sense that the ground under my feet was crumbling. I remember the way Dad's eyes glinted when he said, "You've earned it, son. We're so proud of you. It's time to start your adult life with the right tools." Ryan had beamed at them like the sun itself, basking in the light of their adoration. After dinner, while the plates were being cleared and my parents were fussing over dessert, Dad looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his face suddenly serious. "Vivian," he said. He always used my full name when he was about to say something that would change my life forever. "Your mother and I have been talking. Now that Ryan's graduated, we think it's time you started contributing more to the household." I blinked at him. "Contributing?" Dad leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers over his stomach like a corporate CEO delivering bad news to an underling. "Rent. We think $800 a month is fair, given that you have 2 jobs." I felt the air go out of the room. $800? That was more than half of what I made each month, even with both jobs. "Dad," I said carefully, "Ryan never paid rent when he lived here. He got free room and board and gas money. You paid for everything." Dad's lips twitched, that small condescending smirk that always made me feel about 2 inches tall. "Ryan was in college. You're taking online classes that's different, and he had a future. You've been working, which means you can pay your share." I opened my mouth, but Mom was already nodding. "Your father is right, sweetheart," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "It's time you grew up and learned responsibility." Responsibility. That word had been thrown at me so many times it had lost all meaning. I'd been responsible for Ryan's mistakes since we were kids, responsible for the time he broke Dad's golf trophy, responsible for the dent in the neighbor's car, responsible for making sure he didn't forget his lunch. I'd paid my own way for everything since I was 16, clothes, school supplies, even birthday gifts for family members, and now I was being told I owed them rent. That night, after the dinner party was over and the laughter had faded, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. My room felt like a prison. The pink walls my mother had painted when I was 7 now mocking me with their childish cheerfulness. I thought about the numbers, $800 a month, plus my other bills, and realized I'd never be able to afford it all. Even if I picked up extra shifts, even if I stopped buying anything for myself, it wouldn't be enough. I remembered my grandmother Evelyn's journals, the ones I'd found in the attic after she passed. She'd been meticulous about writing down everything: expenses, letters, memories, and something told me that there was a reason she'd kept them hidden from my father. I'd never had the courage to read them all, but that night I pulled them out of the back of my closet and started skimming through the pages. Her neat handwriting made me feel like she was right there beside me, whispering secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. One entry caught my eye: June 12th. If Robert ever tries to control Vivian's inheritance, I pray she finds the strength to fight back. She's stronger than she knows. My throat tightened. She'd known. Even then, she'd known what kind of man my father was and what he was capable of. That's when I started to plan. Monday morning, I put on my best smile, poured Dad his coffee, and agreed that $800 a month was reasonable. I went to work as usual, serving customers their cappuccinos with extra foam and helping kids find the perfect summer read at the bookstore. But every free moment, I was planning, checking bus schedules, counting the money in my savings account, making a list of everything I owned that actually mattered. I wrote the letter on Thursday night. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a record, a receipt for everything I'd given them that they'd never acknowledged. Every time I'd watched Ryan when they were too busy, every dollar I'd spent on groceries or gifts, every hour I'd worked to keep my grades up and my dreams small enough not to scare them. At the bottom, I wrote, "You won't find me unless I want to be found." On Friday, I gave my notice at the bookstore. I lied and said I was moving to another state to go to school in person. My manager hugged me and told me how proud she was. I nearly cried. Saturday, I packed the duffel bag, my laptop, my grandmother. There's journals, a few changes of clothes, the small jewelry box she'd given me before she died. Everything that made me who I was. At 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, I got dressed in jeans, a sweatshirt, and my most comfortable shoes. I avoided the third stair that always creaked and the loose floorboard by the kitchen door. I left the letter on the table where my mother would find it with her morning coffee. Outside, the air was cool and still. The street lights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and for a moment I hesitated, wondering if I was making a mistake. But then I thought about Ryan's car shining white in the driveway and the way my father's eyes had dismissed me like an afterthought. I walked down the street, past the houses that all looked the same, past the mailbox I'd once hidden behind during hide-and-seek, past the place where Ryan had taught me to ride my bike and then pushed me over for fun. The bus station was nearly empty. A security guard nodded at me without a word. I bought a ticket to New York, paid in cash, and settled into a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, I was free. As the sun rose, casting a pink glow over the horizon, I rested my forehead against the cool glass and let my mind wander to the future. I didn't know what was waiting for me in New York, only that it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. My grandmother had believed in me. She'd left me a trail to follow, and I was determined to find out exactly what it meant to be stronger than I knew. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engine drown out the past. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the chance to finally start living on my own terms. New York City felt like another world entirely, a place where the buildings stretched so high they seemed to scrape the sky, where the streets buzzed with an energy that made me feel both terrified and alive. I stepped off the bus at dawn, the morning air sharp and damp with the promise of a new beginning. I'd only seen New York in movies, the bright lights of Times Square, the yellow taxis honking their horns, the throngs of people going places I couldn't even imagine. But here I was, standing in the middle of it all with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder and a single name in my head: Helena Morgan. Helena was my mother's older sister, a woman who had once been a vibrant part of our family until my father made sure her name was no longer spoken in our house. Growing up, all I knew was that there had been some sort of falling out something about a disagreement over family money, property, or maybe just pride. My mother had stopped visiting her years ago, and my father always rolled his eyes if I even asked about her. "Helena is a meddler," he'd say, like she was some sort of pest, unworthy of further discussion. But as I stood at the Port Authority bus terminal, I knew that if anyone could help me now, it would be the woman my father had tried so hard to erase from my life. I found her name in my grandmother's journals along with an address scribbled in a neat, loop-in hand: 442 West 79th Street, Apartment 6B. I didn't have a phone to call ahead, but I had a destination, and that was more than enough. The subway terrified me at first. Too many people, too many lines and numbers, but eventually I found my way uptown. The building was old but sturdy, with a blue awning over the entrance and brass numbers that gleamed in the morning sun. I took a deep breath, adjusted my duffel bag, and rang the buzzer. "Who is it?" A voice crackled through the intercom, brisk and no nonsense. It's Amelia," I said, my voice trembling. "Amelia Parker. I think you're my aunt." There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if I'd made a mistake, but then the door buzzed and I stepped inside. The elevator smelled like old newspapers and cleaning solution, and every rattle made my stomach twist. When I reached the 6th floor, the door to 6B was already open. Helena Morgan was nothing like I expected and everything I needed. She was older than my mother, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a kind of presence that made the cramped hallway feel like a stage. She was wearing jeans and a loose button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, and she looked at me like she'd been waiting for me her entire life. "Amelia," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "You look just like Evelyn did at your age." I didn't know whether to smile or cry. "Hi," I said. I'm sorry to show up like this." Helena waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. Come in." She closed the door behind me and led me into a living room filled with books and plants and the smell of fresh coffee. It felt warm and alive, so different from the cold perfection of my parents' house. She took my bag and set it by the couch, then gestured for me to sit. "Start from the beginning," she said, and so I did. I told her everything: the rent my father demanded, the way he dismissed my dreams, the letter I wrote before leaving. I even told her about the journals, how I'd found them tucked away in the attic, how my grandmother's words had given me the courage to run. Helena listened without interrupting, her eyes sharp but kind, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "I always knew Robert was controlling, but this, She shook her head. Evelyn tried to warn me. She tried to warn your mother, too, but Laura never wanted to see it. She was so desperate to believe in the perfect family, she ignored the cracks forming right under her feet. I felt a pang of sympathy for my mother, but it was quickly replaced by anger. He used his power of attorney to take money that was supposed to be mine, I said. Grandma Evelyn wrote about it. I think she set up some kind of trust, but I don't know what happened to it. Helena's eyes narrowed. A trust, you say? Evelyn was meticulous about her finances. If she set up a trust, she would have kept records. She stood and crossed to a cabinet by the window, rummaging through a stack of folders. After a moment, she pulled out a thick manila envelope and handed it to me. I've been holding on to this, she said, just in case. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and handwritten notes. My grandmother's neat script covered the margins of every page, annotations and questions and warnings. It was overwhelming, but one document stood out, a trust agreement with my name on it. It says I inherited a trust when I turned 21, I said, my voice shaking, but I never saw a penny of it. Helena nodded grimly. Your father must have gotten a power of attorney when you were in the hospital that time your senior year, when you had that breakdown. I remember Laura calling me, telling me not to worry, that Robert had everything under control. I clenched my fists. He stole it from me. Helena rested a hand on mine. Yes, but now that you know, you can fight for it. The thought terrified me. How? I don't have a lawyer. I don't even have money for a lawyer. Helena's eyes glinted. Don't worry about that. I know someone, Archer Delaney. He's helped families with cases like this before. If anyone can help you get back what's rightfully yours, it's him. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning girl. The next morning, Helena arranged a meeting with Archer at his small office in Brooklyn. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with graying temples and a calm, reassuring presence. He listened to my story with the same seriousness Helena had, asking questions, making notes, and nodding occasionally. Cases like this are more common than you might think, he said when I finished. Power of attorney is often abused, especially when there's a vulnerable family member involved. He flipped through the documents Helena had given me, his brow furrowing. Your grandmother was thorough. These annotations could make all the difference. What happens next? I asked, my voice small. He leaned back in his chair. First, I'll file paperwork to freeze any accounts linked to the trust. That will stop your father from moving money around. Then, we'll request a court order to review the power of attorney and the transfer of funds. My heart pounded. Can I win this? Archer met my gaze. You have a strong case, Amelia. It won't be easy, but I believe you can get back what's yours. Helena squeezed my shoulder. You're not alone in this. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That night, back at Helena's apartment, I sat on the couch with my grandmother's journals spread out around me. The pages smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, and her words felt like a lifeline. She had written about her suspicions of my father, about her fears that he would use his charm and influence to take control of everything. Protect yourself, she wrote in one entry. Never let him make you doubt your worth. You are stronger than you know. I closed the journal and wiped my eyes. I could almost hear her voice in the room, telling me to stand up for myself, to fight for the life she wanted me to have. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and signatures, phone calls, and court filings. Archer worked tirelessly, his calm competence a steadying force in the chaos. My father, of course, responded exactly as I expected, with outrage and denial. He called me childish, ungrateful, a traitor to the family. My mother left voicemails that swung between pleading and scolding. Ryan, predictably, stayed silent, but I didn't back down. I couldn't. One evening, as I was helping Helena cook dinner, the phone rang. She answered and then handed it to me with a look of warning. "It's Ryan." I swallowed hard. "Hello?" "Amelia." His voice was strained like he'd been crying. I I didn't know. I mean, I knew Dad was controlling, but I didn't know he'd taken your money." I wanted to scream at him. How could he not have known? But then I remembered all the times I'd covered for him, all the times I'd let him off the hook. He'd always been the golden boy, and I'd always been the invisible girl. "Ryan," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because it's my right, because I deserve better than what he's given me." There was a pause. "I know," he said quietly. I wish I'd seen it sooner." "Me too," I whispered, and then I hung up. That night, as I lay in the small bedroom Helena had given me, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The past, the betrayal, the uncertainty of the future. But underneath it all, there was something new, a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would win in court, if I would ever get my inheritance back, or if I would ever be able to look my parents in the eye again. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being the girl who sat quietly at the dinner table, cutting her pot roast into tiny pieces and swallowing every insult with a smile. I was Amelia Parker. And, for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight. I had always thought that going back to the house on Maple Street would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to do. Every time I imagined the familiar white siding and the neat little flower beds, a chill ran through me. But when Archer called to say my father had been served with papers and that the court had frozen the trust fund accounts, I knew there was no more hiding. If I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I had to face him in person. Helena offered to go with me, but I refused. This was my battle, and I needed to fight it alone. She stood at her front door as I left, her arms folded across her chest, her eyes sharp with concern. "Remember," she said, "he thrives on making people doubt themselves. Don't give him that power." I nodded, swallowing the fear that threatened to rise in my throat. "I won't." The train ride to my hometown felt like traveling back in time. Every stop brought me closer to the place where I'd spent so many years learning how to disappear, how to shrink myself so small that maybe no one would notice how different I was. But now, as the train rattled and swayed, I realized I didn't want to be invisible anymore. It was late afternoon when I walked up the driveway. The lawn, once so carefully manicured, was overgrown with weeds and the flower beds were dry and brown. The house itself looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. After a few moments it opened, and there he was. Robert Parker, the man who had taught me that love was conditional, that respect had to be earned by being useful, and that usefulness could be revoked at any time. He looked older, grayer, the lines on his face deeper than before. For a split second, I saw the father who used to read me bedtime stories, but then he sneered, and the illusion vanished. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The prodigal daughter returns. Come to beg for forgiveness?" I clenched my fists at my sides. "No, I came to talk." He stepped aside, and I walked into the living room. It felt like a museum of my childhood, but the artifacts were dusty and neglected. My mother's antique clock on the mantel was stopped at 3:14, as if time itself had given up trying to move forward in this place. I turned to face him. "Dad, I know what you did. I know about the trust fund Grandma Evelyn set up for me. I know you used your power of attorney when I was in the hospital to take it. I know you stole money that was meant for my future." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's what this is about? Money? I gave you a good life, Amelia. I put food on the table, a roof over your head. You owe me." I felt my anger boil over. "I don't owe you anything. I worked 2 jobs. I paid for my own clothes, my own books. I gave up everything so you and Mom and Ryan could pretend we were the perfect family. And all you did was take." His face hardened. "That's life, Amelia. The strong take what they can. The weak get left behind." I shook my head. "No, that's your life. That's the life you chose, but it's not mine." He stepped closer, his eyes cold and sharp. "You always were the smart one," he said, his voice low. "Smarter than Ryan, smarter than your mother, smarter than me, probably. I couldn't let you have that power over me." I felt a pang of pity for him, a man so afraid of his own daughter that he'd stolen her future just to feel like he was still in control. But that pity didn't erase the damage he'd done. "Archer is filing charges," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to have to answer for what you did. The court has frozen the accounts. You can't hide anymore." His face went red, and his hands clenched at his sides. "You ungrateful little—" "No." I held up a hand. "I'm done listening to you talk down to me. I'm done letting you control me. You don't get to decide who I am anymore." We stared at each other in silence, the air thick with years of unspoken words. Finally, he looked away, his shoulders slumping. "What do you want from me, Amelia?" I took a deep breath. "I want a confession. I want you to sign a statement admitting what you did, that you took my trust fund, that you forged my signature, that you abused your power of attorney. And I want you to make a public apology to Mom and to me." He snorted. "You think I'm going to sign something like that? You think I'm going to humiliate myself like that?" I met his eyes, unflinching. "Yes," I said simply, "because it's the right thing to do. And because if you don't, Archer and I will take this as far as we need to. You'll lose everything." He stared at me, his face pale. "You'd really do that? To your own father?" "You did it to your own daughter," I whispered. "Now it's your turn to pay." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask he'd always worn. "Fine," he said. "Bring me the papers. I'll sign them." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt hollow. He sank into his armchair, suddenly looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I hope you're happy," he muttered. "Destroying your own family." I turned away. "No," I said, "I'm saving myself." As I stepped outside, the sky was beginning to darken, the first stars winking into existence. I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I'd done it. I'd faced the man who had stolen so much from me and demanded he take responsibility. At the curb, Archer's car was waiting. He'd insisted on coming in case things got ugly, but I'd wanted to handle it on my own. Now he rolled down the window and gave me a questioning look. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, sliding into the passenger seat. "It's done," I said. "He's going to sign." Archer gave a small smile. "I'm proud of you, Amelia. That took a lot of courage." I stared out the window as we pulled away from the house that had been both my prison and my proving ground. "I just hope it's enough," I said softly. "It's a start," Archer said. "And sometimes that's all you need." The ride back to the city was quiet. The hum of the engine and the glow of the dashboard lights soothing in a way I hadn't expected. I thought about everything that had happened, about my father's cold eyes, about the bitterness in his voice, about the relief I felt now that I'd stood my ground. Helena was waiting for me when we got back. She didn't ask what had happened, just pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "You did it," she whispered. "You faced him." "I did," I said, my voice breaking. "And I think he hates me for it." "Good," Helena said fiercely. "That means you're finally free." That night, I sat in bed with my grandmother's journals spread around me. I read her words over and over, letting them sink into my bones. "You are stronger than you know," she had written, and now I finally believed her. I didn't know what would come next. There would be court dates and legal battles, maybe even more ugly fights with my parents. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the girls like me, girls who had been told to sit down and be quiet, to make themselves small so others could shine. I hoped that by standing up, by fighting back, I could show them that it was possible to break free. In the darkness, I whispered a promise to myself. I would never disappear again. It had been 2 weeks since my father signed the confession and agreed to make a public apology. 2 weeks since the papers were filed and the court began the process of returning my trust fund to me. 2 weeks since I had looked him in the eye and demanded the justice that had always felt out of reach. And yet, every morning when I woke up in Helena's apartment, a part of me still felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the shoe never dropped. Instead, the days grew longer, the air warmer, and life somehow started to feel lighter. Helena's apartment had become a kind of sanctuary, filled with sun-drenched windows, the smell of coffee and fresh herbs from the pots on the windowsill, and her soft voice humming old folk songs as she bustled around the kitchen. I'd taken a job at a small bookstore just a few blocks away, a cozy place with creaky wooden floors and a handwritten chalkboard sign that changed daily depending on the owner's mood. I loved it there. I loved recommending books to strangers, learning their stories, and seeing their faces light up when they found just the right story to get them through the week. One Wednesday morning, as I was stocking a new shipment of paperbacks, my phone buzzed with a text from Archer. "Trust fund transfer complete. Funds secured in your name." The words hit me like a punch and a hug all at once. After so many years of living paycheck to paycheck, of sacrificing every small luxury, I could finally breathe. I could finally choose. I sank onto the floor between the shelves, tears filling my eyes. Helena was waiting at home when I got back that evening. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug so tight it nearly took my breath away. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." I nodded, pressing my face into her shoulder, letting the tears flow freely for the first time in months. It felt like shedding a skin I'd worn for too long. A few days later, I decided to use a small portion of the money to visit Grandma Evelyn's grave. It felt right, like she'd been the silent witness to everything I'd been through, the secret strength that had guided me every step of the way. The cemetery was quiet and green, the headstones weathered by time. I sat by her grave and pulled out the last letter she'd written to me, the one I'd kept sealed until I felt ready. "Dearest Amelia," it began, "if you're reading this, then I hope it means you've found the courage to stand up for yourself. I hope you know how proud I am of the woman you're becoming. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe. Don't let anyone take that from you, and don't let the pain of the past keep you from building the future you deserve. I love you always, Grandma Evelyn." The tears came again, but they were different this time, softer, more cleansing. I whispered a promise to her memory. I would live a life she'd be proud of. I would honor her name and make sure her legacy wasn't just a pile of old journals and forgotten dreams. When I got back to the apartment, Helena was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of letters in front of her. "These came for you," she said, pushing the stack toward me. I recognized my mother's handwriting on several of them, Ryan's on one, and the rest from people I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, old friends, even one from a teacher who'd heard about what happened. My hands shook as I picked up the letter from my mother, the words on the envelope blurred by the tears in my eyes. Inside, her words were hesitant, fragile, like a bridge built with toothpicks. "Amelia," she wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did. Your father had a way of making me feel small, of making me doubt myself. I let him control me, and I let him hurt you. I'm so sorry. I've filed for divorce. I'm trying to rebuild my life just like you. I hope someday we can talk again." I folded the letter carefully, pressing my hand over my heart. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her yet, but I knew I wasn't angry anymore. She'd made her choice, just like I had, and maybe, in time, we could find our way back to each other. Ryan's letter was shorter, scrawled in his messy handwriting. "Viv, I'm sorry. I was weak. Dad made it easy for me to take the easy way out, and I did. I can't undo what happened, but I'm going to try to make it right. I'm paying back the tuition bit by bit. I started working at a construction site. I know it's not much, but it's honest. I hope you're okay. Love you always, Ryan." For the first time in my life, I believed him. The following weekend, Helena surprised me by inviting me to a community center downtown. The building was an old library that had been converted into a space for support groups, workshops, and classes. The place hummed with laughter, conversation, and the kind of hope that you could almost reach out and touch. She led me to a small conference room filled with folding chairs and a whiteboard. "This is where you can make a difference," she said, handing me a marker. "Tell your story. Help others find their strength, too." At first, I was terrified. I stood at the front of the room, my palms sweaty, my voice trembling. But as I looked out at the faces, some young, some older, all waiting to hear what I had to say, I felt that spark ignite in my chest. I told them about my father, about the trust fund, about the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit his definition of who I was supposed to be. I told them about running away at 4:11 a.m. with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of rage. And I told them about how I'd found my grandmother's journals, and in them, the strength to stand up and fight back. When I finished, the room was quiet. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice small. "How did you find the courage to leave?" I smiled at her. "I didn't at first," I said honestly. "I was terrified. But then I realized that staying was killing me, slowly, one day at a time. And leaving, well, That was the only way I could save myself. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Afterward, a few people came up to thank me, to share their own stories. Every time someone said, "You gave me hope," a piece of the weight I'd been carrying lifted. Helena watched from the back of the room, pride shining in her eyes. That night, as we walked back to her apartment, she put her arm around me. "You know," she said, "your grandmother would be so proud of you. You've taken everything they tried to use against you and turned it into something that helps others. That's real strength." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. "I finally feel like I'm living my own life," I said. "Like I'm not just a footnote in someone else's story." A week later, Archer called with one last piece of news. The judge had ruled in my favor. The trust was fully restored, with back interest and penalties. My father had been ordered to pay restitution and had been sentenced to community service. It wasn't prison, but it was accountability. And for the first time, he'd have to answer to someone else. I went to the bookstore that afternoon and picked up a blank journal. On the first page, I wrote, "June 2nd. Today, I won. Today, I took back my life." A month after the ruling, I visited the old house on Maple Street one last time. The women's shelter had already begun renovations, painting over the pink walls of my childhood bedroom, tearing up the old carpet, and transforming the space into something safe and welcoming. I stood on the sidewalk, watching a group of volunteers carrying boxes of donated clothes and toys. A little girl in a yellow dress waved at me from the window, and I waved back, smiling. As I turned to leave, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned around and found myself staring into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. "Hi," he said, holding out a hand. "I'm Elijah. I work here organizing donations and helping families get settled." I shook his hand, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "I'm Amelia," I said. "I grew up here. Sort of." He laughed softly. "Sort of." "It's a long story," I said. He tilted his head. "Well, I'd love to hear it. Over coffee, maybe?" I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." As we walked away from the house that had both broken me and built me, I felt lighter than I had in years. I thought of Grandma Evelyn, of Helena, of Ryan, and even of my mother, and I knew that somehow all of it had led me here. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was mine. And that was enough.